Hello and welcome to Dialogue. Well, the world is following closely the wave of great rapprochement in the Middle East. In the wake of the restoration of Saudi-Iran diplomatic ties, a remarkable transformation is taking place in Saudi society under the young leadership of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. With measures comparable to China's reform and opening up, the country is leaping into a high-tech future. To take a close look at these significant changes, I'm glad to be joined in the first half by Wang Jin, Associate Professor from Northwest University of China, and Meir Javedanfar, Middle East Analyst in Israel. In the second half, I will talk to Senator Mushahid Hussain, Chairman of the Pakistan Senate Defense Committee and Pakistan-China Institute, and also co-chairman of the International Conference of Asian Political Parties. That's our topic. I'm Xu Qinduo. Hello and welcome to Dialogue. And Wang Jin, I will start with you. Vision 2030 of Saudi Arabia has three main goals for this country. To make the country the heart of the Arab and Islamic world, to make it a global investment powerhouse, and finally, to transform the country into a hub connecting three continents, Asia, Europe, and Africa. It's massively ambitious, isn't it?
Yes, of course, it is a very important and ambitious plan for Saudi Arabia to transform its country totally. Because traditionally, we know that Saudi Arabia is a country with economy highly dependent upon its oil, its natural resources, especially the oil exporting. And meanwhile, it is a country that is very conservative. And it's also the country that with a very, very special ideology and political and social environment. So under the new 2030 vision, Saudi Arabia is trying to transform itself from a very traditional, conservative, energy, highly dependent state into the very new style, new mechanism driving country, and not to mention about the economy, but also talking about the social circumstances and political environment. So that is a very, very important and ambitious plan for Saudi Arabia, and also it set a good example for the rest of the Islamic and Arab world for them to explore their ways of development, their ways to transforming their own countries.
Mm-hmm. Meir, according to the plan of the country, the kingdom will increase non-oil revenue from more than 43 billion in 2015 to over 266 billion in 2030. And the last year, its non-oil revenue already reached 104.6 billion, which means half of its 2030 target has been basically completed. So can we say Saudi Arabia is well on track to achieve its goal, or in this case, of course, fiscal dependence or reduce the fiscal dependence on oil?
Well, I think the country certainly is showing tremendous potential and ambition. The 2030 vision doesn't just include building infrastructure. It also includes a massive change in the education system in Saudi Arabia, expansion of universities in Saudi Arabia. They're bringing top-notch physics and chemistry professors and research labs from universities, especially in the United States and other places, to re-educate the Saudi students. They are also expanding the private sector. As we know, majority of the Saudi workforce was working in the public sector. And to go from the public sector to the private sector is not just changing work sector, it's also change of working culture. And there's also a change that's happening there. And also what's very important is, which I have to emphasize, is the change in the infrastructure, the massive investment. We can see the Saudis are especially partnering with the People's Republic of China to create first-class infrastructure to connect the different cities via rail in Saudi Arabia, and also building the roads network and rail network. So I think overall they have the potential. Whether they will succeed, it really depends. Look, unfortunately, the world economy is facing a crisis. As we can see, inflation is eating into the U.S. economy. that reduces the demand for oil, and Saudi Arabia needs to maximize its income from oil to invest in the non-oil sector. So to conclude, the potential is there. The programs of investment in Saudi economy to diversify away from oil are good, but whether it will achieve it, it has the potential. That's the best I can say.
It has the potential. Wang Jin, some would say Saudi's plan is comparable to what happened in China in the reform and opening up period. The plan aims to increase the percentage of women in the workforce. On that front, the target has already been reached, with the share of women in the workforce growing to over 37% as of now, which has already surpassed the 30% target set for 2030 goal. So how positive is such a change to the economy as well as to the society?
I think it's a very positive, very, very important factor that finally influence and finally help transform the Saudi Arabia society. Because what we're talking about is a country with a large population, and also among the population, more than half, more than 50 or nearly 70 or 60% of these people are very young people. The people that are under the age of 35, even under the age of 30. So traditionally, as we just mentioned, that Saudi Arabia is a country with conservative social principles and social environment. So for this country, for Saudi Arabia itself, if we are trying to Saudi kingdom trying to transform the country from the very conservative circumstances, especially social thinking, social background, into the very modern, even very circumstances. It is very difficult. So even that we are looking at the very, very small achievement, for example, the freedom the women to get the driving license, to the freedom for the women to go out of their home, and also even that what we're talking about, some kind of a little transformation of economic structure of Saudi Arabia, especially just as Javedanfar mentioned, that during the past decade, a lot of very negative factors in the global economy. But even against this, all kind of this very negative factors, Saudi Arabia actually successfully transform its country from the very conservative into the very modern one. And also, even this kind of achievements are very tiny. Even some of them are very tiny, some of them very apparent. But this is a very, very important achievement that has made in the historic moment. And also, I think it will pave the way for the more achievement, the more opportunities in the future for Saudi Arabia and also for the regional countries.
Well, Meir, it's true. I mean, there's a little bit setback in terms of reducing the reliance on the traditional energies, including oil. But I think that it has something to do with the pandemic and the Ukraine conflicts, as a lot of countries, they go back to coal plants, for example. But if you look at other sectors of the society, such as the percentage of women in workforce and recreational revenues of the country, are very popular, especially for the young people. So these changes, can we say they are very positive and probably are laying the foundation for further profound changes in the country?
Absolutely. As my respected colleague in China emphasized, and you rightly said, to the issue of women working in Saudi Arabia, increasing number of women in participating. That's almost like changing the national sport of United States from baseball to soccer. It's that big of a change in terms of conservative values. Saudi Arabia is a very conservative country, and not just because of Islam, it's because of its geography. Geography impacts politics. Geography impacts culture. This is why it's called geopolitics. Saudi Arabia is a country that was basically a barren desert with towns and cities very far away from each other. There was a lot of lawlessness before. King Al Saud came and reunited all these tribes, built the country, but the country remained conservative because it's a very, very tough environment to live. There's very little water. There was no oil before. The main export was dates and income from Saudi Hajj, from the pilgrimage. So naturally the country was very conservative because of its geography, because of the Bedouin lifestyle of its citizens. We also have the Bedouins in Israel, I can tell you, and because of their living conditions, because they're constantly moving, they have to protect their women, and one of the ways was to keep them indoors. But so to change all of this history, to bring it now to a point where there are now 37% of the workforce in Saudi Arabia is women, that's in terms of societal change, it's almost a biblical proportion. It is a tremendous ground-shifting change in the outlook of the country towards its citizens, and this is one of the most hopeful signs that Saudi Arabia is moving in the right direction. Look, nobody here can promise you that Saudi Arabia is going to reach its 2030 goals. But what I can say now already is that Saudi Arabia is making their efforts required. It is making the very difficult changes, is undertaking them. The king is taking responsibility, Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince. The efforts are there, and that in itself is a tremendous achievement.
Mm-hmm. Well, Meir, you mentioned about it's difficult decisions. Why do you say that? I mean, do you mean there are conservative forces, not everybody accepting these changes?
Of course, look, we come from different society, different backgrounds. You in China, you have your own culture. Your cultural norms are based on your history, are based on what your country went through, based on your religious beliefs, based on your political experience. The same goes for every country, and the same goes for Saudi Arabia, because of their history, because it was a very, living a life as a Bedouin was very, very unsafe, and this is one of the reasons why women had to be covered. Because water resources were so scarce, there was a lot of fighting over these very scarce resources, and usually needed one strong king to come and place order, so that everybody shared these resources in an efficient manner. And that issue, one of the consequences of that was the position of women. And I think, the change that's going to happen, you're going to have, not only are you going to empower women, what's also very important is that Saudi Arabia needs expertise from abroad. And when foreigners see that Saudi Arabia is now treating its female citizens with more respect, with more equality, more people from Israel, from America, from People's Republic of China will feel comfortable going into such a society, living there and contributing to it. Because if you're contributing now to Project 2030, you're not just contributing to an economic project. You're contributing to a project that is changing Saudi society for the better. And what better than giving women more rights and opportunities?
Mm-hmm. Meir, if you look at their foreign policy or views on certain global issues, for example, the Ukraine conflict, in which they decided to stay neutral, like the majority of the world, and at the same time, you see they are maintaining good relationship with other developed countries, and also they have a close relationship with China and Russia. So how do you look at this kind of independent practice of their diplomacy?
Saudi Arabia is following a policy that the late Shah of Iran, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, called positive nationalism. Basically having relations with all countries, dealing with all different, both sides, even in the same conflict, having good relations with both. The Saudis they sent a delegation to Ukraine. They also have good relations with Russia. They have good relations with China and the United States. It's positive nationalism, working positively to serve your national interests. And yes, this is a policy that the Saudis are following, much to their success. Look, it's not a bulletproof policy. There's no such thing as one magic pill that you will take and everything will just disappear. But the Saudis are at least are on the right medication, if I could put it that way, in terms of advancing their own interests. Sometimes a country needs to make difficult decisions. Sometimes they need to go against their traditional allies. The Saudis were not happy with some of the American policies in the Middle East, which is why they've also significantly improved their relations with China, with People's Republic of China. And this is something that's probably going to serve their interests well. But please, let's not be under any illusions. This is not going to solve all of our problems, all of their problems. They're going to have problems still in Yemen. It's not clear whether there's going to be a ceasefire. But yes, they are on the right direction. And I have to be honest with you, the country that they are following and the country who's done this tremendously well is the United Arab Emirates. They are the first to do this. They are the example to follow, and Saudi Arabia has followed in terms of how to develop a non-oil economy, how to develop its non-oil sector, how to have good relations, how to balance the different superpowers to meet its own interests. I have to say the country that was the pioneer in the Gulf region was United Arab Emirates. And I'm very happy to see that Saudi Arabia are following such a great example. Let's be honest, NEOM is going to be baby Dubai. Basically, NEOM is NEOM is the copy of Dubai, what the Saudis want to have in their country. And Dubai has been such a good example that, yes, why not? Well, we should replicate good things from other countries.
Mm-hmm. Let's take a short break. We'll be back right after this. Senator Hussain, you wrote a piece about the reforms in Saudi Arabia. I wonder, how do you characterize this reform agenda undergoing in this country?
Good evening to you and good evening to your viewers. I would say this is quite a remarkable development that we are seeing in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. In fact, I call it a silent revolution. And in that article that you referred to, I've also compared it, although it's a bit far-fetched in terms of time and space and a sense of history, with the initiative taken by China under the great visionary leader Deng Xiaoping in the 80s, which reform and opening up. And I see that shades of that model being replicated in a very conservative, which was once a backward, status quo-oriented society, and which is transforming the Saudi state and society in a manner that few in the world are able to fathom or understand. And of course, both Deng Xiaoping and MBS, the Mohammed bin Salman, the Prime Minister of Saudi Arabia, were facing skeptics mostly from the West. So it's very interesting to see this historical evolution.
Mm-hmm. What's behind the drive to reform the country, and where is the destination?
I would say there are two important ingredients of that. Number one, the new leadership in Saudi Arabia, led by the young Mohammed bin Salman, who is known by his abbreviation as MBS, Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. He is the Crown Prince also. I think he represents the young generation. And there's been a generational turnover in Saudi Arabia from people who were octogenarians or septuagenarians to a young, youthful leader who is in his late 30s. And so his vision is different as opposed to the vision of the older generation. And secondly, I think Saudi Arabia has realized that there are new realities in the region, in the world. The world is being transformed. And there is an inexorable shift in the global balance of economic and political power away from the West to the East. And those new realities require new policies.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you look at China's development, because earlier we said there's a comparable, let's say, reforming agenda between China and Saudi Arabia. The Chinese economic growth has helped to lift 800 million people out of poverty, and today 130 out of 193 members of the UN have more trade with China than, say, they have with the US. Are you seeing a similar promising future for Saudi Arabia?
See, that is the key. China has been pursuing for the last 4 plus decades, first under Deng Xiaoping and now under President Xi Jinping, basically an economic vision of cooperation, of connectivity, reform, opening up, the Belt and Road Initiative, the Global Civilization Initiative, the Global Development Initiative, the Global Security Initiative, so many other initiatives. And these are all aimed at promoting what they call win-win cooperation, that everybody is included, there's nothing against anybody, and everybody also gains. There's a mutual benefit in that. And this vision contrasts with the other vision that we have been seeing in the last couple of decades, since the 21st century, since 9/11, which was promoted by the West, by the United States particularly, that talks of war, conflict, confrontation, containment, while China talks of connectivity, cooperation, consultation. So there are contrasting visions. And Saudi Arabia seems to be embarking on an economic vision, which is more in sync with what they see China is doing. And I think that matches their own core interests. So I think that this is what I refer to as some of the new realities in a rapidly changing global and regional scenario that we are witnessing today.
If we are seeing these changes, given this importance of Saudi Arabia in the Arab world and also in the Muslim countries, what are the implications for the transformation of Saudi Arabia, let's say, for the rest of the Muslim world?
You see, for example, Saudi Arabia was traditionally identified, Saudi Arabia is about pushing money from madrasas or seminaries or promoting militancy. That was the image. Today, it's what I call a tripod of trade, technology, and tourism, and basically promoting also a non-oil economic vision. And don't forget, Saudi Arabia is a very key country in the Arab and the Muslim world because it is the guardian of the holy places for Muslims. So Saudi Arabia does give a lead, and people do look up to Saudi Arabia for leadership, for guidance. And in my view, a key element of the model being pushed by MBS, the younger leadership of Saudi Arabia, is that Islam and modernity can coexist. And he's talking about modernity and modernization, not westernization. There's a difference between modernization and westernization. So I think that is extremely important, that Islam and modernity can coexist. And modernity means it being part of the international system. It means rights for the people, people-centered development. It means focusing on issues that matter to human security, whether it's education, women's role. Chairman Mao used to say women hold half the sky. And I think MBS seems to have taken a leaf out of that page, because women have been given their rights now, which were denied for so many decades in the past. So I think it's really a silent revolution, as I put it in my article. And I think he's being inspired by the Chinese model, frankly.
Right. I mean, can we say Saudi Arabia is setting an example for other countries? Say modernization and Islam can go hand in hand. And what kind of modernization they are pursuing? This is a good example by what they are doing right now.
And modernization also means moderation, tolerance, inclusivity, carrying people together. I think that is what I always say, that when China launched this global civilization initiative, it's about inclusivity, about countries, cultures, and continents and civilizations. And Saudi Arabia, when it is also following in the same path, that will have implications for other Muslim countries. And I can feel it when I travel to many of the countries in the Arab world. There's a new buzz there. There's a new zing, if I may say so, in the youth among the Muslim countries, and they feel this is the way forward. And because it's giving them a dream of a better tomorrow and a better future for them and for their progeny.
A very encouraging development, can I say. What about the domestic response, from the public, for women and for the young people in particular? Are they embracing these reforms, these changes of the country?
I think that the current leadership of Saudi Arabia, led by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, is quite popular in Saudi Arabia. I was recently in Saudi Arabia and I witnessed the changes myself. And there was a lot of sense of euphoria, excitement among the youth. And Saudi Arabia is now becoming what others would say a more normal way of life. And they feel that this is something which had not been there for them in the past. It was denied to them. And now they can be participating. For example, even in sports, you saw the professional golf tournament coming to Saudi Arabia. And it was very interesting. And I was quite surprised and ironical that Western countries were criticizing that, although that's about sports. So even the very fact that Saudi Arabia is moving forward in a positive direction under a modern young leadership who is dynamic, that creates problems for certain countries in the West, which to me is quite inexplicable.
Can you talk more about creating problems for certain Western countries? Well, of course, we are in the realm of foreign policy making here. We do see, for example, on some major issues like Ukraine conflict, Saudi Arabia and other Arab countries, they are taking a much more nuanced position than the Western countries here.
You see, on Ukraine, it's not just Saudi Arabia. You can see Pakistan, India, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Mexico, South Africa. All these countries, they feel Ukraine is a European war and it's part of a European Cold War. And which is and one element is the expansion of NATO. And now we are talking of NATO's expansion even in Asia. They're trying to have a NATO office in Tokyo, which is very strange. And they talk of a China threat in the NATO document. And I told the NATO representative recently when I met them, I said, last time I checked my map, China was thousands of miles away from the North Atlantic. So what are you guys talking about this China threat now? So is it a new Cold War you want to create? And also you can see that MBS said no to President Biden. When Biden said we need more energy and raise the production of oil, he refused. And because there was American arrogance, they treated Saudi Arabia very badly. They were very arrogant and they felt that they could bully or browbeat. Those times have changed. That is the new reality. These countries, whether it's UAE or Saudi Arabia or all these countries, they wanted the boycott of the Beijing Olympics last year. And Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, all of these countries, of course, Pakistan is a good friend of China, was always there, but other countries were there also. They rejected the boycott. For example, in Pakistan, we rejected the so-called democracy summit organized by Biden last March, because it's not about democracy and human rights. They want to weaponize democracy and human rights against China and other countries. So there are a lot of double standards. And I think suddenly now the West is discovering that these countries are slipping out of their hands and they are now asserting their authority, their autonomy, and their own core interests are paramount, not the interest of former distant godfathers in the West, as was the case for several decades.
More independent foreign policy, prioritizing their own national interests. With that, we come to the end of today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app or on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.